The chains we wore. The crystalline spires of Valareth Prime gleamed under 3 suns, their light reflecting off surfaces that had stood for 10,000 years. Within the Grand Ascendancy Chamber, Ambassador Thane Corrigan stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his worn leather boots silent on marble floors worth more than his homeworld's annual GDP. "The human delegation will wait," announced Archon Valus Kayshan, his voice carrying the harmonic undertones unique to the Cylinder race. His silver skin shimmered as he gestured dismissively, for arms moving in synchronized contempt. Thane didn't flinch. 3 years as Earth's representative to the Valerian Empire had taught him patience. The Cylinders, the Kvalesh, the Morphidians, all the founding races of the Empire, they all made humans wait. It was the natural order, they said. Humans were the newcomers, the primitives who'd barely achieved faster-than-light travel before being absorbed into the Empire's protective embrace. Protective. The word tasted bitter. Behind Thane, Lieutenant Kira Voss shifted her weight. Young, brilliant, and far too idealistic for this den of predators. "Sir, the Earth Council's message was marked urgent." "They're all urgent, Kira," Thane murmured. "But we're not the ones who set the priority." 2 hours later they were granted audience. The Archon reclined on his suspension platform, surrounded by the Empire's elite. Thane recognized them all. Warlord Kryn of the Kvalesh war clans, whose species had conquered half the known galaxy before joining the Empire, High Scholar Thesha Orn, a Morphidian whose crystalline form pulsed with barely contained energy, and a dozen others, each representing races that had forgotten more about civilization than humanity had learned. "The human world's petition for representation on the Defense Council," the Archon read from the holocrystal, his tone suggesting he was discussing waste disposal. "Based on contributions to the recent Outer Rim conflicts." "Contributions," Warlord Kryn rumbled, his massive form causing the floor to vibrate. "Is that what we call it when humans die by the thousands doing work our races refuse?" Thane's jaw tightened. The Outer Rim conflicts. 17 human colony worlds devastated by the Skrell incursions while the Empire's superior races maintained their core territories. 30 million human soldiers conscripted to hold the line. They called it service. Thane called it what it was, expendable labor. "The Defense Council is comprised of founding races," Archon Valus stated. "Races with established military traditions spanning millennia. Humanity has been part of the Empire for barely 50 years. Perhaps in another century, when you've proven your worth beyond mere enthusiasm." Mere enthusiasm. Thane thought of Commander Elise Merrick, who'd held Station Carthage for 16 days against impossible odds. Of the entire Third Fleet, vaporized buying time for a Cylinder evacuation. Of his own son David, whose last message had been simple, "Tell them we mattered, Dad." "We understand, Archon," Thane said, his voice level. "Earth will continue to serve." As they left the chamber, Kira's hands were shaking. "How do you stand it? How do you smile and bow while they—" "Because revolution requires preparation," Thane said softly, ensuring his words didn't carry beyond her ears. "And preparation requires time." Across the galaxy, in the industrial sectors that the Empire's elite never visited, something was stirring. On New Hebron, a mining colony administrator named Marcus Blackwood stood before a gathering of 300 humans, their faces grimy from the refineries that processed exotic matter for Cylinder warships. "They take our resources, our labor, our lives," Marcus said, his voice echoing off metal walls. "They give us speeches about honor and service. But what happens when the servants stop serving?" In the academic halls of Threshold Station, Dr. Yuki Tanaka made a discovery that would change everything. The Empire's faster-than-light communications network, the technology that bound 1,000 worlds together, had a vulnerability. Not a flaw, a backdoor deliberately hidden by its Morphidian creators to maintain control. And on Sanctuary, humanity's first colony world, General Amara Singh reviewed troop deployments with new eyes. The Empire had scattered human military units across 70 star systems, diluting their strength. But scattered also meant embedded. Positioned. Present in every critical system. Thane Corrigan returned to Earth 3 months later. In a secured bunker beneath the ruins of Old Geneva, he met with the Shadow Council, humanity's true leadership, operating beneath the Empire's notice. "They've rejected every petition, every request for equal standing," Thane reported. "And they've increased conscription quotas by 40%. Chairman Elena Vasquez studied the holographic display showing human worlds, human ships, human soldiers scattered like seeds across the Empire. "Then we move to the next phase. Marcus has the industrial sectors ready to shut down. Dr. Tanaka can sever the communications network. General Singh's units are positioned. When? Asked Kira, who'd finally been brought into the circle. Thane looked at each face around the table. Humans who'd served, sacrificed, and waited for this moment. We were their servants. We did the work they wouldn't do, fought the wars they wouldn't fight, died the deaths they wouldn't die. We know every system, every station, every vulnerability. He activated a countdown on the central display, 72 hours. In 3 days, Thane said, we show them what happens when the servants become the masters. The mechanism of power. Dr. Yuki Tanaka hadn't slept in 48 hours. The neural interface embedded at the base of her skull pulsed with heat as streams of data flooded her consciousness. Around her in the laboratory, 300 years of Empire technology hummed with the arrogance of assumed permanence. You're certain about the cascade pattern? The voice belonged to Commander Jace Rothschild, head of humanity's quietly established cyber warfare division. A division the Empire didn't know existed because they'd never imagined humans capable of sophisticated electronic warfare. 97%, Yuki replied, her fingers dancing across haptic interfaces. The Morphidians built redundancy into the FTL-COM network, but it's redundancy designed for random failure, not coordinated assault. They never anticipated anyone understanding the architecture well enough to weaponize it. Because they'd kept humans away from the core systems, assigned them menial technical roles. Yuki had spent 5 years as a maintenance technician on Threshold Station, cleaning data buffers and replacing power couplings. Work beneath the notice of the crystalline Morphidians who built the network. Work that had given her complete access. The irony, Jace said, a grim smile crossing his scarred face, is that they taught us. Every system we were assigned to maintain, every manual we were given to follow, every simple task they deemed appropriate for human intelligence. Yuki pulled up a 3-dimensional map of the Empire. The FTL network appeared as glowing threads connecting 1,000 worlds, with major hub nodes pulsing like hearts. When I trigger the cascade, these 17 hub stations will experience what appears to be simultaneous critical failures. The network will fragment into isolated clusters. The Empire will be blind, deaf, and mute for approximately 40 hours before they can implement workarounds. 40 hours, Jace repeated. 40 hours to reshape the galaxy. On New Hebron, Marcus Blackwood watched the sunset, a spectacular display of orange and violet as the planet's binary stars sank below the horizon. Behind him, the Kyber refinery complex stretched for kilometers, its towers processing exotic matter under the supervision of exactly 3 cylinder overseers and 200 human workers. The overseers had no idea that Marcus had spent 2 years mapping every critical system, identifying every choke point, recruiting every frustrated human engineer who'd watched their innovations dismissed because they came from primitive minds. His communicator chimed. Encrypted, routing through 7 relays, the message was simple. Countdown active. T-minus 24 hours. Marcus walked into the main processing facility. The workers knew something was coming. The tension had been building for weeks. He caught the eye of Svetlana Kozlov, shift supervisor and former Earth military engineer. She nodded once. Tomorrow the Empire would learn what happened when you built your economy on the backs of people you underestimated. General Amara Singh stood on the observation deck of the Vigilance, a Kvalesh-class battlecruiser in the 5th Combined Fleet. Technically, she commanded the human auxiliary units, the support personnel who maintained the ships, operated the supply lines, and died first when the Empire needed sacrifices. In reality, she commanded something far more dangerous. Status report, she said quietly. Captain Reza Mahajan, her second-in-command, pulled up a tactical display. 73 star systems. In each, we have human military units embedded with Empire forces. Marines providing security, 4-cylinder administrative centers. Engineers, maintaining critical infrastructure. Supply officers, managing logistics networks. And they've noticed nothing? Why would they? We're servants. We exist to serve. Reza's voice dripped with contempt. The Kvalesh warlords plan battles. The Cylinder Archons govern. The Morphidians innovate. Humans fix things when they break and die when ordered. That's the natural hierarchy. Amara studied the display. The Empire's military might was undeniable, warships that could crack planets, weapons that could ignite stars. But that military ran on logistics, maintenance, communications, and infrastructure. All managed by humans. The enemy has spent 50 years teaching us their systems, Amara said. Teaching us how to maintain their ships, operate their stations, manage their networks. They've positioned us in every critical system because we're cheap, expendable, and in their minds too simple to threaten them. She pulled up personnel records. 3 million human military personnel, scattered across the empire. Each one trained, positioned, and waiting. T-minus 24 hours, Reza confirmed. Then we find out if servants can topple gods. On Earth, in the Geneva bunker, the Shadow Council conducted its final coordination meeting. Chairman Elena Vasquez, a woman who'd lost 2 daughters to Empire conscription, stood before the assembled representatives of humanity's hidden resistance. Phase 1. Dr. Tanaka severs the FTL communications network. The Empire fragments into isolated clusters. Phase 2. Marcus Blackwood and the industrial cells shut down exotic matter production, fuel synthesis, and weapons manufacturing. The Empire's war machine starves. Phase 3. General Singh's embedded units seize control of critical infrastructure in 73 systems simultaneously. She paused, letting the magnitude sink in. We're not fighting a war, Elena continued. We're performing surgery. The Empire is vast, powerful, and ancient. But it's also complacent. They've forgotten that empires don't fall to external enemies. They fall when the systems that sustain them stop functioning. Thane Corrigan spoke from his position at the tactical station. The Valerian Empire has stood for 10,000 years. They've absorbed 100 species, weathered countless wars, survived challenges that would have destroyed lesser civilizations. They believe they're eternal. He smiled, and there was nothing pleasant in it. Tomorrow we teach them that nothing is eternal. We teach them that the servants they ignored, the workers they exploited, the soldiers they spent like currency, we were paying attention, learning, preparing. The countdown reached 23 hours. Across human-controlled space, in factories and shipyards, in military barracks and engineering stations, in research facilities and mining colonies, 3 billion humans received a simple encrypted message. Chains off tomorrow. Remember why we serve. Remember who we are. Remember that we decide our fate now. The Empire slept, secure in its power, confident in its superiority. They had no idea that their servants were about to become their masters. The severing. Dr. Yuki Tanaka's hands moved with surgical precision across the quantum interface. Around her, the laboratory hummed with barely contained energy as she prepared to cut the throat of an empire that spanned 1,000 worlds. T-minus 60 seconds, Commander Rothschild announced, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were about to do. Yuki had spent 3 years mapping the FTL communications network, 3 years hidden in plain sight as a maintenance technician while the Morphidians who'd built the system treated her like living furniture. They'd never imagined that the quiet human cleaning their data buffers was memorizing every protocol, every failsafe, every vulnerability. 40 seconds. The network appeared on her display like a nervous system of light. 17 primary hub nodes, each managing communications for dozens of star systems. The Morphidians had built redundancy, but they'd built it with arrogance, assuming no one else could understand their crystalline technology well enough to weaponize it. They'd forgotten that humans had a gift for breaking things. 20 seconds. Yuki thought of her brother, conscripted into the Empire's auxiliary forces at 19. His last message had come from a ship called Perseverance, defending a cylinder colony world. The ship had been vaporized. The Empire's official condolence message had been 3 sentences long, auto-generated, addressing her brother as Human Unit 7742 Delta. 10 seconds. Dr. Tanaka, you are authorized to proceed. Her fingers danced one final sequence. The cascade virus she designed didn't destroy the hub nodes, destruction could be repaired. Instead, it convinced each node that every other node was experiencing critical failure, triggering isolation protocols that the Morphidians had built into the system as a safety measure. The Empire's own safeguards became its chains. Execute, Yuki whispered. The effect was instantaneous. Across the galaxy, FTL communications died. The Valerian Empire, which had spoken with one voice across 1,000 worlds for 10 millennia, suddenly went silent. On Valereth Prime, Archon Valus Kaishan was reviewing taxation reports when his communication array went dark. Every channel, every relay, every connection to the wider empire simply ceased. What is this? He demanded, his 4 arms gesturing in agitation at his Morphidian technical advisors. High Scholar Thesha Orn's crystalline form pulsed with confused light patterns as she interfaced with the local hub node. Impossible. The primary hub is reporting that all secondary hubs are experiencing simultaneous cascade failures. But the probability of 17 independent failures occurring at precisely the same microsecond is this an attack? Warlord Kryn interrupted, his massive Kvalesh frame rising from his seat. An attack on the communications network? Thesha's form flickered with the Morphidian equivalent of laughter. By whom? Only Morphidians understand the quantum crystalline architecture. Unless you're suggesting my own people. She stopped. On her display a pattern emerged. Every hub node was isolated, but each was reporting perfect functionality locally. This wasn't random failure. This was coordination. Get me status on the human technical personnel, Thesha said, her humor evaporating. On New Hebron, Marcus Blackwood stood in the central control room of the Kyber refinery, watching the cylinder overseers realize something was wrong. Their communication devices had gone silent. No connection to Valareth Prime. No link to the regional governance station. Nothing. This is obviously a technical malfunction, Senior Overseer Kale announced, his silver skin rippling with annoyance. Summon the human maintenance staff too. Marcus pressed the button. Throughout the refinery complex, carefully placed charges severed critical connections. Not explosions, the Empire would simply rebuild. Instead, precision cuts that disabled the exotic matter processors in ways that would take months to repair, assuming anyone could figure out what had been done. The cylinder's arrogance had blinded them to a simple fact. Humans had maintained these facilities for decades. They knew every system, every vulnerability, every dependency. What have you done? Kale demanded, finally understanding. Marcus met his gaze levelly. What you trained us to do. We maintained your systems. Learned them. And now we're shutting them down. Across 50 industrial worlds, the same scene played out. Refineries went dark. Manufacturing plants ground to a halt. Shipyards ceased production. The Empire's economy, built on the backs of human labor, simply stopped. General Amara Singh moved the moment the communications network died. On the Vigilance, her auxiliary forces had spent 3 years positioned near every critical system. Ship maintenance crews in the engineering sections. Security personnel near the bridge. Supply officers controlling the logistics networks. Execute takeover protocol, she ordered. Captain Mahajan moved with lethal efficiency. His team, disguised as routine maintenance crew, locked down the engineering section in 30 seconds. The Kvalesh warriors in the ship's armory found themselves sealed behind blast doors they couldn't breach, doors that humans had quietly reinforced over months of routine maintenance. On the bridge, Commander Svetlana Kozlov, officially the human liaison officer, pulled a weapon from beneath her console. Fleet Captain Vorn, I'm relieving you of command. The massive Kvalesh warrior stared at her with incomprehension. You? A human? You dare. I dare, Svetlana said calmly as a dozen other humans on the bridge revealed their weapons. Because you taught us to dare. You put us on every ship, in every system, near every critical control. You thought we were too primitive to threaten you. Across 73 star systems, the pattern repeated. Human forces seized control of Empire infrastructure with stunning coordination. Not through superior firepower, they were still vastly outnumbered, but through superior positioning and perfect timing. The Empire had spent 50 years placing humans exactly where they needed to be to take it apart. On Valareth Prime, the truth finally dawned on Archon Valus as reports flooded in through the local networks that still functioned. Industrial production ceased. Communications network fragmented. Military forces compromised. All simultaneously. All coordinated. The humans, he whispered. This is impossible. They're primitives. They've been part of the Empire for barely 50 years, Warlord Kryn interrupted grimly. 50 years of watching, learning, preparing. We put them in our factories, on our ships, maintaining our infrastructure. We thought they were servants. High Scholar Thesha's crystalline form had gone dark with something approaching fear. The virus in the communications network is elegant, sophisticated. It uses our own isolation protocols against us. Whoever designed this understood quantum crystalline architecture better than most Morphidians. A human did this? Valus couldn't comprehend it. A human we employed as a maintenance technician, Thesha confirmed, pulling up personnel records. Dr. Yuki Tanaka. Earth Doctorate in Quantum Systems. We assigned her to clean data buffers because we thought her credentials were primitive fabrications. She's been on Threshold Station for 5 years. The Archon felt the foundations of his worldview cracking. Send forces to arrest her immediately. With what communications? Thesha asked. The network is fragmented. Each world is isolated. And even if we could coordinate. She pulled up tactical displays showing the simultaneous seizures across dozens of systems. The humans are embedded in every critical system. They've positioned themselves perfectly. In Geneva, Elena Vasquez watched the tactical display as reports flooded in. Green indicators appeared across the map as human forces secured objectives. Phase 1, communications severed. Phase 2, production halted. Phase 3, infrastructure seized. Casualties? She asked. Minimal, General Singh reported via encrypted quantum link. Most Empire forces are too confused to resist effectively. They never imagined this scenario. Thane Corrigan allowed himself a slight smile. Because in their experience, conquered species don't rise. They submit. They accept their place. They never imagine that the servants might be learning while they serve. Across the Empire, the realization spread like fire. The humans, the primitive newcomers, the expendable labor, the unimportant servants, had just executed the most sophisticated coordinated operation in galactic history. The servants had stopped serving. And the masters were discovering what it meant to be helpless. The shift in power. Archon Valus Kaishan stood in the Grand Ascendancy Chamber, staring at tactical displays that showed his empire fragmenting. Around him, the elite of the Valerian Empire faced a reality none had considered possible. 17 hours, Fleet Marshal Draven reported, his Kvalesh accent thick with barely controlled rage. 17 hours since the communications network collapsed. 50 industrial worlds dark. 73 star systems reporting human forces in control of critical infrastructure. And we can't even coordinate a response because those primitives severed our ability to communicate. They're not primitives, High Scholar Thesha Orn said quietly, her crystalline form pulsing with what humans might recognize as grudging respect. We called them that because it made us comfortable. Because it justified treating them as expendable. But a primitive species doesn't execute an operation of this complexity. Warlord Kryn slammed a massive fist against the marble table, cracking it. Then what are they? Thesha pulled up personnel files. Thousands of them. Humans scattered across the Empire in positions the founding races had deemed beneath their attention. Maintenance technicians with doctorates in quantum physics. Supply officers with military strategic training. Engineers who designed Earth's first starships before the Empire absorbed their world. They're what we made them, Thesha said. We took their best and brightest and assigned them to menial labor because we couldn't imagine that humans possessed real intelligence. We handed them access to every system we built. And we never noticed because we'd convinced ourselves they were incapable of understanding what they were seeing. On the Vigilance, Captain Reza Mahajan stood on a bridge that now flew human colors. A simple blue and white banner that represented Earth and her colonies. Around him, the ship's Kvalesh crew sat in restraints, their proud warrior heritage reduced to prisoners on their own vessel. Fleet Captain Vorn glared at his captors with pure hatred. This is temporary. The Empire has 10,000 ships. Millions of warriors. You've seized what, 100 vessels? 200? You cannot hold what you've taken. You're right, Reza agreed pleasantly. We can't hold everything. That's not the plan. He activated a display showing the Empire's territory. Red zones indicated industrial worlds that had gone dark. Blue zones showed systems where human forces controlled critical infrastructure. Yellow zones marked worlds where the population was still primarily Empire loyalists. We don't need to hold everything, Reza explained. We just need to hold the right things. Like this ship. Do you know what makes the Vigilance special, Fleet Captain? Vorn's silence was answer enough. This ship, Reza continued, is one of 17 vessels that carry quantum encryption keys for the Empire's secure military network. A backup communication system, completely separate from the civilian FTL network Dr. Tanaka so elegantly dismantled. The Empire's military can still communicate, but only through ships like this one. He gestured to the other restrained Kvalesh officers. Ships that are now under human control. Which means the Empire's military can communicate, but only if we allow it. Only if they route through us. Only if we decrypt and encrypt every message. The implications crashed over Vorn like a wave. You've made yourselves gatekeepers of our military coordination. We learned from the best, Reza said. For 50 years, the Empire controlled humanity by controlling our communications, our economy, our military coordination. We're just applying the lesson. On New Hebron, Marcus Blackwood faced a different challenge. Unlike the military seizures, which had the element of surprise, the industrial shutdown had made human intentions immediately clear. And now the Empire's response was beginning. Imperial dropships incoming, Svetlana Kozlov reported from the refinery sensor station. 3 heavy transports with Kvalesh shock troops. They'll be here in 20 minutes. Marcus studied the approaching vessels. The Empire's military might was still overwhelming in any direct confrontation. But direct confrontation wasn't the plan. Let them land, he ordered. Evacuate to Rally Point Sigma. Svetlana's expression showed her confusion. Sir, we've held this facility for 18 hours. If we abandon it, they can have the facility, Marcus interrupted. Let them have the buildings, the equipment, all of it. Because it doesn't matter. He pulled up schematics of the exotic matter processors. What makes exotic matter valuable isn't the machinery, it's the process. The precise calibration of quantum fields, the exact timing of particle acceleration, the specific configurations that prevent cascade failures. All of that exists here. He tapped his head. And here. He gestured to the 50 human engineers preparing to evacuate. The Cylinders designed these systems, Marcus explained, but humans have been operating them for 30 years. We know every detail, every modification, every workaround. The Empire can reclaim these buildings, but without us they're just empty shells. It'll take them years to retrain personnel who can actually run these refineries. 20 minutes later, Kvalesh warriors stormed into the Khyber refinery to find it abandoned. They secured empty control rooms, dormant processors, and a facility that would take 18 months to bring back online. On Earth, in the Geneva bunker, Chairman Elena Vasquez received reports from across human-controlled space. The picture was complex but trending positive. Military seizures, 83% successful, General Singh reported. We control critical ships and stations in 71 systems. The Empire still has superior numbers, but they're scattered and poorly coordinated without reliable communications. Industrial shutdown, complete, Marcus Blackwood added via secured channel. All exotic matter production has ceased. The Empire's shipyards are already running out of fuel for their reactors. Their weapons manufacturers can't produce new ordnance. In approximately 72 hours, their military won't be able to sustain active operations. Political impact, significant, Thane Corrigan contributed. 17 member species of the Empire are questioning the founding race's competence. If the Empire can't even maintain control over its own servant species, how can it protect its citizens from external threats? Elena studied the strategic map. The Empire was vast and humanity's victories were impressive but limited. They'd struck hard and fast, but sustaining the rebellion was another matter entirely. We've broken their communications, strangled their economy, and seized key military assets, she summarized. But the Empire has resources we can only dream of. Eventually they'll adapt. They'll find workarounds. They'll coordinate a response. How long do we have? Dr. Yuki Tanaka appeared on the secure channel from Threshold Station. I estimate 96 hours before the Morphidians implement functional communication alternatives. They're brilliant, they'll solve this. But every hour they spend blind is an hour we entrench ourselves. Then we have 4 days to change the equation, Elena decided. Thane, you're recalled from Valareth Prime. We need you for Phase 4. Phase 4 wasn't scheduled for another week, Thane objected. Plans change. The Empire is reeling, confused, and disorganized. That won't last. We need to move while we have momentum. Get to Sanctum Station. We're calling the summit. Across the galaxy, the message went out through channels the Empire couldn't intercept. Encoded in commercial shipping manifests, hidden in innocuous maintenance logs, buried in routine administrative data, an invitation that would reshape the balance of power. To all species currently under Valerian governance, humanity invites you to Sanctum Station for a summit of equals. Come discuss a galaxy where service is voluntary, where governance is consensual, and where no species is expendable. On Valareth Prime, Archon Valus received news of the invitation with disbelief. They're inviting our member species to negotiate with them? The arrogance, the audacity. They're servants who've temporarily disrupted our operations, nothing more. But Warlord Kryn was reading reports with troubled eyes. 3 species have already accepted. The Telmorians, the Veist, and the Corvellan League. Species that have chafed under our governance for centuries. Species that now see humans doing what they never dared attempt. 3 species, Valus dismissed it. Out of hundreds. 3 species today, Thesha corrected. But they're watching. Every species in the Empire is watching. And what they see is humans doing the impossible. They see servants becoming masters. And they're wondering, if humans can do it, why can't we? The crystalline scholar pulled up casualty reports from the human uprising. Archon, notice anything interesting? Valus scanned the data. What am I looking for? The death toll. 17 hours of coordinated rebellion across 73 star systems. Know how many casualties the humans have inflicted on Empire forces. The Archon checked the numbers. His eyes widened. 47, Thesha said. In 17 hours they've killed 47 of our people. They've seized our infrastructure, shut down our economy, fragmented our communications, and they've done it almost bloodlessly. They're not waging war, Valus. They're performing surgery. She enhanced the display, showing seized facilities, captured ships, controlled stations. They're showing the galaxy that revolution is possible without genocide. That change is possible without slaughter. Every species that's ever resented our governance is watching and learning. Warlord Kryn stood slowly, his massive frame seeming to carry the weight of 10,000 years of imperial certainty. We didn't just underestimate the humans. We gave them the keys to everything. Taught them our systems. Showed them our vulnerabilities. Positioned them perfectly to take us apart. So what do we do? Valus asked. The three leaders of the Valerian Empire looked at each other, and for the first time in living memory they had no answer. In 4 days the summit would convene, and the galaxy would decide whether empires ruled by right or by consent. The Summit of Equals. Sanctum Station hung in the void between stars, a human-built facility that had begun as a deep space research outpost and now served as the stage for something unprecedented. A gathering where no species held dominion over another. Ambassador Thane Corrigan watched ships arrive through the station's observation dome. Telmorian science vessels, their organic hulls pulsing with bioluminescent patterns. This diplomatic cruisers, angular and efficient. The Corvellan League's flower-like ships that looked more like art than engineering. And more, 17 species in total, each one sending representatives to hear humanity's proposal. Impressive turnout, Kira Voss observed, her young face showing a mixture of excitement and nervousness. But I count 17 species here. The Empire has hundreds. Revolutions start with the willing, Thane replied. These 17 are the ones brave enough, or desperate enough, to risk the Empire's wrath. The others are watching to see if we survive. Chairman Elena Vasquez joined them at the observation deck. Status report? The Empire has managed to restore partial communications, Thane said. Limited FTL network using backup protocols. They're coordinating a military response, but it's slow and fragmented. Dr. Tanaka estimates we have 48 hours before they can mount a concentrated counteroffensive. Then we have 48 hours to make this work, Elena decided. Let's not waste them. The summit hall had been designed for this moment, a circular chamber where no position held prominence over another. Representatives from 18 species sat in a ring, each with equal voice, equal visibility, and equal importance. Thane stood in the center, knowing that the next hour would determine whether humanity's rebellion sparked a new era or simply became a footnote in the Empire's long history. For 10,000 years, he began, the Valerian Empire has maintained order across the galaxy. They've prevented wars, protected trade routes, and created the largest civilization known space has ever witnessed. These are not small achievements. He saw surprise on several faces. They'd expected denunciation, not acknowledgement. But the Empire has also operated on a fundamental premise, that some species are inherently superior to others. That governance should flow from the top down, from the enlightened to the primitive, from the ancient to the young. That service is owed by the lesser to the greater. Thane activated a holographic display showing human worlds. 50 years ago, Earth joined the Empire. We were told it was for our own protection. That we were too young, too inexperienced, too primitive to navigate the galaxy alone. Perhaps that was even true. He pulled up casualty figures. In 50 years we've lost 30 million people to the Empire's wars, their labor conscriptions, their experimental programs. We've been told this is the price of protection. The cost of civilization. That our sacrifice serves a greater good. The human ambassador's voice hardened. 3 weeks ago we decided we'd paid enough. We severed your communications. We shut down your industries. We seized control of critical infrastructure across 73 star systems. And we did it to prove a point. He gestured to the assembled species. Every one of you has chafed under the Empire's rule at some point. The Telmorians were forced to share their biological technology. The Theist had their antimatter research confiscated. The Corvellan League saw their worlds mined for resources with minimal compensation. All in the name of imperial necessity. Delegate Kesh of the Telmorians spoke, her tendrils waving in agitation. The humans speak truly, but what alternative do you propose? The Empire maintains stability. Without it, we return to the chaos of the old wars. Species fighting over resources, territory, power. The Empire ended that cycle. Did it? Thane challenged. Or did it simply consolidate all the fighting under one authority? The Empire fights wars at the outer rim. The Empire extracts resources. The Empire decides which species prospers and which serves. The boot is still stomping, it just wears an imperial insignia now. He pulled up a new display, a proposed structure for galactic governance. Humanity proposes the Concordat of Free Worlds. A voluntary association where member species maintain sovereignty over their own territory, contribute to mutual defense based on agreed proportions, and make collective decisions through democratic consensus. Chaos. Warlord Kryn's voice boomed through the chamber as he entered uninvited, flanked by Kvalesh warriors. Thane wasn't surprised. Archon Valus allowed you to attend? The Archon is learning to recognize changed circumstances, Kryn rumbled, taking a position at the ring despite not having been invited. But this proposed Concordat is fantasy. 17 species, each with its own interests, trying to reach consensus? You'll spend decades arguing while threats go unaddressed. Better than one species deciding for everyone else, retorted Ambassador Mirachin from Titan Station. The Empire's rapid decisions have rapid consequences, usually for everyone except the decision makers. You want to discuss consequences? Kryn gestured to the Kvalesh warriors. Without Imperial coordination, the Skrell incursions would have reached the core worlds. The Empire's centralized command made rapid deployment possible. Your Concordat would have debated while worlds burned. Dr. Yuki Tanaka stood from her position in the human delegation. The Empire deployed human forces to fight the Skrell. 3 million conscripted soldiers. We didn't debate, we were ordered. Tell me, Warlord, how many Kvalesh regiments fought in that war? Kryn's silence was telling. The Empire's strength, Yuki continued, comes from the species it controls. You deploy our forces, extract our resources, and call it coordination. But it's only efficient because you don't ask permission. The Concordat's inefficiency is a feature, not a bug. It forces cooperation instead of coercion. Delegate Theshan of the Vast, a species known for their mathematical precision, spoke up. The Concordat proposal is interesting, but it addresses governance. What about the practical matter of your current rebellion? The Empire is wounded but not dead. They'll regroup. They'll counterattack. Can your alliance withstand Imperial might? Elena Vasquez stepped forward. We don't intend to fight the Empire. We intend to transform it. She pulled up a new display showing the galaxy divided into regions. The Concordat proposes the following. Species that wish to remain under Imperial governance may do so. Those who prefer autonomy within the Concordat can join us. We're not demanding the Empire's dissolution, we're offering an alternative. You're fracturing the galaxy, Kryn accused. We're ending a monopoly, Elena corrected. For 10,000 years the Empire has been the only option. Join or be conquered. Submit or be destroyed. We're proving that other paths exist. Species can choose their own governance models, their own alliances, their own futures. Archon Valus's voice suddenly resonated through the chamber via holographic projection. He'd clearly re-established enough communication to monitor the summit remotely. And when the next great threat emerges, when the next Skrell incursion or worse appears, your fractured Concordat will tear itself apart, deciding how to respond while the threat grows. Thane had been waiting for this. Archon, with respect, the Empire's greatest threat has always been internal. Species resentment. Labor unrest. The cost of maintaining control over hundreds of worlds. How many resources do you spend just maintaining dominance? He pulled up economic data. The Empire allocates 40% of its resources to internal security. Monitoring subject species. Suppressing dissent. Maintaining garrisons on reluctant worlds. The Concordat eliminates those costs because membership is voluntary. Species that join want to be here. The resources saved can go to actual threats. General Amara Singh added her perspective. The Empire has 10,000 ships. Impressive. But how many can you deploy when you need garrison forces on 300 worlds to maintain order? The Concordat's military would be smaller but more mobile. More efficient. More focused on external threats instead of internal control. Warlord Kryn studied the tactical data with a warrior's eye. You're proposing that voluntary association makes for stronger defense than enforced unity. I'm proposing, Amara said, that soldiers who choose to fight are more effective than conscripts who are forced to. The chamber fell silent as the delegates absorbed the implications. Delegate Kesh finally spoke. The Telmorians will join the Concordat. Provisionally. Subject to review after 1 standard year. The Theist concur, Theshan added. Though we wish to maintain non-aggression treaties with the Empire as well. 1 by 1 species committed. Not all 17. Some needed time, others wanted to see how the Empire responded. But 11 species formally joined humanity's Concordat that day. It was enough. Archon Velus's hologram flickered with what might have been resignation. You understand that the Empire cannot simply allow this secession. Precedent matters. If we permit species to leave freely, others will follow. Then don't permit it, Thane said. Recognize it. Accept it. Adapt to it. The galaxy is changing, Archon. The question is whether the Empire changes with it or clings to old certainties until they collapse. Kryn stood, his massive form radiating tension. The Empire will respond. Military force may still be necessary. Against 11 species acting in concert? General Singh challenged. With your communications still compromised, your economy still disrupted, and your military still scattered? Warlord, you're a brilliant strategist. Run the numbers. Calculate the cost of forcing us back into submission. Then ask yourself, is maintaining the old order worth that price? The Kvalesh warrior's eyes met the human general's. For a long moment, Predator assessed Predator. Then slowly Kryn nodded once. I will convey to the Archon that military force may be counterproductive. For now. As the summit continued into detailed negotiations, Kira approached Thane quietly. Do you think it'll actually work? The Concordat. Thane watched the delegates arguing over voting procedures, resource allocation and mutual defense protocols. Messy. Complicated. Inefficient in all the ways the Empire had avoided. I think, he said, that we've proven something important today. We've proven that servants can become masters. Not through violence or vengeance, but through preparation, coordination, and the courage to offer an alternative. Outside the station, ships from 11 species held formation together. Not an imperial fleet commanded from above, but an alliance of equals, messy and complicated and beautiful in its voluntary cooperation. The Empire would endure. No institution 10,000 years old vanished overnight. But it would endure changed, humbled, and sharing the galaxy with an alternative it could no longer ignore. The servants had stopped serving. And in doing so, they taught the galaxy a lesson that would echo for millennia. Power given can be power taken. But power earned, power shared, power chosen, that endured. The new equilibrium. 3 months after the Summit of Equals, the galaxy settled into an uneasy but functional balance. The Valerian Empire endured, but its monopoly on galactic governance had been permanently broken. On Valereth Prime, Archon Velus stood before the Sovereign Council, a body that for 10,000 years had dictated terms to the galaxy and now found itself negotiating with equals. The Concordat of Free Worlds has stabilized at 23 member species, High Scholar Thesha reported, her crystalline form pulsing with analytical light. 11 from the original summit, 12 who joined subsequently. Notably, no species has left the Concordat to return to exclusive imperial governance. Warlord Kryn added his strategic assessment. The Concordat military remains smaller than imperial forces, but they've demonstrated concerning coordination. Last week's joint exercise between human, Telmorian, and Theist fleets showed integration levels we typically achieve only after years of joint operations. Velus studied the galactic map. Blue regions marked Concordat space, red indicated imperial territory, and purple showed the growing number of systems claiming dual citizenship, acknowledging both the Empire and the Concordat, playing both sides. How many species are requesting similar autonomy within the Empire? Velus asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. 47 formal petitions, Thesha confirmed. All demanding governance structures similar to the Concordat. Democratic representation, voluntary military service, sovereignty over internal affairs. The Archon's 4 arms moved in a gesture of frustrated acceptance. The humans have fundamentally altered the political landscape. Not through conquest but through demonstration. They've proven that alternatives to imperial governance are viable. More than viable, Kryn noted. The Concordat's economic output has actually increased since their independence. Turns out species work more efficiently when they're working for themselves rather than for distant imperial administrators. Velus made a decision that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. Prepare a proposal for imperial reformation. Member species can petition for autonomous governance while maintaining defense and trade treaties with the Empire. We adapt or we watch our civilization fragment. On Sanctum Station, the Concordat faced its own challenges. Chairman Elena Vasquez presided over a council chamber that contained 23 species, each with its own priorities, and discovered that democracy was messy in ways dictatorship never was. The Corvellan League objects to the proposed military deployment budget, Delegate Tharn was saying, his crystalline voice ringing with indignation. We joined the Concordat to escape militarization, not to fund new fleets. The Skrell haven't disappeared, General Singh countered. Neither have a dozen other external threats. If we want to maintain independence from the Empire, we need the ability to defend ourselves. Perhaps we negotiate defensive treaties with the Empire, suggested Ambassador Kesh. Maintain independence and governance while acknowledging their military superiority. That's how occupations begin, Thane warned. Today it's defensive treaties. Tomorrow it's joint bases. Next year they're making military decisions for us, for our own protection. The debate stretched for 3 hours before reaching a compromise, a smaller military than Singh wanted but with mandatory contributions from all member species. Democracy was slow, frustrating, and absolutely nothing like the efficient dictates of imperial governance. Elena loved it. Dr. Yuki Tanaka had returned to Earth to work on the Concordat's communication infrastructure. Unlike the Empire's centralized network, the Concordat was building a distributed system with no single point of failure. Ironic, her assistant Jiro observed. We broke the Empire by exploiting centralization. Now we're building something they can't break by avoiding it. We learned from their weaknesses, Yuki agreed. But we also learned from their strengths. The Empire's FTL network was brilliant. It just assumed it would never face sabotage from within. We're building something that assumes bad actors and plans accordingly. She pulled up the network architecture. Hundreds of independent nodes, each capable of routing around damage, each operated by different species with different security protocols. Inefficient, yes, but resilient in ways the Empire's elegant system never was. Freedom is messier than tyranny, Yuki reflected. But mess is harder to kill. On New Hebron, Marcus Blackwood stood in a refinery that was once again producing exotic matter, but this time for Concordat shipyards rather than imperial vessels. The facility looked similar but everything about it felt different. Production is at 90% of pre-rebellion levels, Svetlana reported. Could be higher, but the workers insisted on proper safety protocols that the Empire always waived. Marcus smiled. Imagine that. When people work for themselves instead of distant overseers, they care about not dying on the job. Revolutionary, Svetlana said dryly. But it was revolutionary in its way. The workers controlled safety standards, elected their own supervisors, and participated in decisions about production quotas. Messy, inefficient, and absolutely transformative. The Empire would have produced more exotic matter by simply demanding it. The Concordat produced less but with a workforce that was invested, engaged, and constantly innovating because they knew they'd benefit from improvements. On the Vigilance, Captain Reza Mahajan commanded a ship that had become symbolic of the new order. Crew from 5 species worked side by side, not because they were forced to, but because they'd chosen to serve on humanity's flagship. Sir, we're receiving a distress call, this tactical officer reported. Imperial freighter under Skrell attack, Epsilon sector. This was the test. The Concordat had declared itself a mutual defense pact, but responding to Imperial distress calls wasn't technically required. Many on the Council had argued for strategic indifference. Let the Empire handle its own problems. Plot intercept course, Reza ordered. Maximum speed. Sir, their Empire, his officer noted. They're in distress, Reza corrected. We don't let people die because of political boundaries. That's what separates us from the old Imperial model. The Vigilance arrived to find 3 Skrell raiders harassing an Imperial transport. The engagement was brief. The raiders fled when they realized they faced a heavy cruiser. The Imperial crew was saved, confused, and deeply uncertain about why humans had responded to their distress. Tell them, Reza instructed his communications officer, that the Concordat responds to all distress calls in our patrol zones, regardless of political affiliation. Because that's what civilization means. The message would spread. Word would reach the Empire that Concordat ships protected even Imperial vessels. It would confuse the old certainties about enemies and allies, servants and masters. That was the point. Back on Sanctum Station, Thane met privately with Warlord Kryn, who'd become an unofficial liaison between Empire and Concordat. The Archon is implementing reforms, Kryn reported. Autonomous governance for species that petition. Democratic representation. Voluntary military service. He's adopting your Concordat model within imperial structure. Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, Thane observed. Don't be smug, Kryn warned, though there was no heat in it. The Empire is 10,000 years old. It survived by adapting. We're adapting to you. Good. The galaxy is better when governance systems compete to serve their people rather than rule them. Kryn studied the human ambassador. You understand that some of us still believe the Empire's way was superior, efficient, effective. Your democracy is messy and slow. It is, Thane agreed. But it's also harder to corrupt, harder to abuse, and harder to turn into tyranny. We'll take messy freedom over efficient oppression. The Kvalesh warrior nodded slowly. The younger races are watching what you've accomplished. Seeing that change is possible. The Empire will endure, but it will endure transformed. I'm uncertain whether I should thank you or curse you for that. Try both, Thane suggested. We usually do. On Earth, in the same Geneva bunker where the rebellion had been planned, the Shadow Council met for what Elena Vasquez declared would be their final session. We set out to break humanity's chains, she said, looking at the faces of those who'd risked everything. We succeeded beyond our wildest projections. 23 species in the Concordat. Imperial reforms spreading across their remaining territory. A new model of governance competing with the old. So what now? General Singh asked. Now we build, Elena said. We prove that our model works not just in rebellion but in routine governance. We show the galaxy that democracy, messy and frustrating as it is, produces better outcomes than dictatorship. Marcus spoke up. The Empire is reforming, but they're still an empire. They still have advantages we don't, older technology, more resources, institutional knowledge spanning millennia. True, Thane acknowledged. But we have something they're still learning, genuine consent from our governed. Species that choose to stay rather than being forced to serve. That advantage will compound over time. Dr. Tanaka added, the Empire spent 10,000 years convinced that their way was the only way. We've shattered that certainty. Even if the Concordat failed tomorrow, we've proven that alternatives exist. That's a bell you can't unring. Kira Voss, who'd grown from uncertain lieutenant to confident diplomat during the rebellion, offered a final thought. My grandmother used to say that every empire falls eventually. The question is whether it falls to something better or something worse. We've given the galaxy a better option. Elena stood, raising a glass. To the servants who became masters. To the chains we broke. To the galaxy we're building. And to the knowledge that power freely given is the only kind worth having. The toast echoed through the bunker, carried by people who'd changed the galaxy through preparation, courage, and the audacity to imagine alternatives. Outside, ships from dozens of species moved through space under their own authority, governing themselves by choice, defending themselves by consent. The Valerian Empire endured, but it endured alongside competitors, challenged by alternatives, forced to justify its existence through service rather than domination. And somewhere in the vast machinery of imperial governance, species that had served for centuries looked at the Concordat and whispered, if they could do it, why can't we? The revolution wasn't over. It had just become permanent. Legacy. 50 years after the Summit of Equals, Ambassador Kira Voss, now chairman of the Concordat Council, stood before an assembly that would have seemed impossible a half-century earlier. The Great Assembly Hall on Unity Station hosted representatives from 67 species. 43 Concordat members sat alongside 24 Imperial delegates in a gathering that blurred old boundaries until they meant almost nothing. The vote is concluded, Kira announced, her voice carrying across the chamber. By 2/3 majority, both the Concordat and the Empire ratify the Treaty of Mutual Recognition. We are no longer competing powers but parallel systems, each offering different paths to galactic citizenship. Applause erupted, a sound that mixed human clapping with Telmorian chime song, Kvalesh stomping, and a dozen other expressions of approval. In the diplomatic gallery, an elderly Thane Corrigan watched with satisfaction. Beside him sat Archon Miris Kaven, daughter of the late Archon Valus, representing an empire that had evolved almost beyond recognition. Your father would have found this disturbing, Thane observed. My father, Miris replied, died believing the empire was eternal and unchangeable. I'm grateful we proved him wrong before the empire died with him. The empire had survived by transforming. Species could now choose their relationship with imperial governance. Full membership, autonomous affiliation, or amicable separation to join the Concordat. The old certainties about superior and inferior races had been abandoned, replaced by pragmatic recognition that diversity of governance produced better outcomes than enforced uniformity. On New Hebron, Marcus Blackwood's grandson supervised a refinery that produced exotic matter for both Imperial and Concordat shipyards. The workers elected their own leadership, maintained their own safety standards, and innovated constantly because they knew they'd benefit from improvements. "My grandfather used to tell stories about the old days," young Marcus said to his Corvellan shift supervisor. "When humans were just labor units, numbers on imperial spreadsheets." "My people remember similar times," the Corvellan responded, his crystalline form flickering with ancestral memory. "The Empire treated us as resource extraction tools. Pretty tools, but still just tools." They stood together watching production lines that represented a fundamentally different philosophy. People working because they chose to, benefiting from their labor, investing in their own futures. "Think the old ways will ever come back?" young Marcus asked. "No," his supervisor said firmly. "Because now we remember there were alternatives. That's the real revolution your grandfather's generation achieved, not breaking chains but making certain we remember what chains felt like." On Earth, Dr. Yuki Tanaka taught quantum communications theory at the renamed Geneva Institute for Distributed Systems. Her students came from 30 species, learning to build networks that resisted centralized control. "The Empire's network was brilliant," she told her class. "Elegant, efficient, and catastrophically vulnerable to coordinated disruption. The Concordat's network is messy, redundant, and almost impossible to fully compromise. Which approach is superior?" A young cylinder student, unthinkable 50 years ago, raised a hand. "Neither? Both? They serve different values. The Empire's network optimized for efficiency. The Concordat's network optimizes for resilience. The best answer depends on what you prioritize." Yuki smiled. "Exactly. And that's the fundamental change my generation fought for, the acknowledgement that there isn't one best answer. That different species, different cultures, different philosophies can coexist without one dominating the others." On the Vigilance, now commanded by Admiral Svetlana Kozlov, crew from a dozen species prepared for patrol along the outer rim. The old divisions between Imperial and Concordat forces had blurred into cooperative defense networks where affiliation mattered less than competence. "Sir, we're detecting Skrell raiders in the Theta sector," her tactical officer reported. "Both Imperial and Concordat assets in the area. Coordinate with all forces," Svetlana ordered. "Standard Joint Operations Protocol." The response would be seamless, Imperial ships and Concordat vessels working together not because they were forced to, but because they'd spent 50 years learning that cooperation produced better outcomes than competition. The Skrell raiders fled before the combined fleet even arrived. They'd learned that the galaxy had changed, that old certainties about divided defenses no longer applied. General Amara Singh, now retired and teaching at the Concordat Military Academy, watched the engagement remotely and felt pride at how naturally the forces integrated. Her students, from multiple species in both the Empire and Concordat, studied the operation as an example of effective coordination. "Notice how neither force dominates," she pointed out. "The Imperial cruisers have superior firepower, but the Concordat's distributed sensor network provides better tactical awareness. They complement each other by choice, not by command hierarchy." A Kvalesh cadet raised a question. "General, my grandfather fought in the old Imperial forces. He says the Empire's unified command structure was more efficient than this joint cooperation model." "Your grandfather is probably correct," Amara acknowledged. "Dictatorships are often more efficient than democracies. But efficiency isn't the only value worth optimizing for. Freedom, consent, dignity, these matter too. Sometimes the slower path is the better one because everyone walks it willingly." At the Great Assembly, Chairman Kira Voss met privately with Archon Miras after the treaty signing. Two women who represented fundamentally different governance philosophies, finding common ground. "There are still hardliners in the Empire," Miras admitted. "Old families who believe the founding races should govern the galaxy. They think my father's reforms and my continued evolution of them are betrayals." "We have similar voices in the Concordat," Kira replied. "Species that think any cooperation with the Empire is surrendering our principles. They remember when you ruled us. So how do we move forward?" Kira pulled up a display showing galactic civilization, trade routes, communications networks, defense treaties, cultural exchanges. The old red and blue divisions between Empire and Concordat had faded into purple interconnection. "We do what your father's generation couldn't imagine and mine fought to achieve," Kira said. We prove that different systems can coexist. That there isn't one right way to organize civilization. That the galaxy is big enough for multiple philosophies. Mira studied the display. The Empire has endured for 10,000 years by being unchanging. Your rebellion forced us to evolve. I'm still uncertain whether to curse your ancestors or thank them. Try both, Kira suggested, echoing words Thane had once spoken to Warlord Kryn. We usually do. On Sanctum Station, now a joint diplomatic facility serving both Empire and Concordat, a museum told the story of the rebellion. School children from dozens of species wandered through exhibits showing the careful preparation, the coordinated uprising, the summit that changed everything. One display showed the empty refinery control room on New Hebron, abandoned by human workers just before Kvalesh troops arrived. Another held the virus Dr. Tanaka had used to fragment the communications network, preserved as a teaching tool about systemic vulnerabilities. But the centerpiece exhibit was simple, a holographic recording of Ambassador Thane Corrigan's speech at the first summit, explaining why servants had stopped serving. A young human child watched the recording, then turned to her Cylinder teacher. Why did they have to fight? Couldn't they just ask for freedom? The teacher, descendant of the same Cylinders who'd once treated humans as primitive labor, knelt to the child's level. They asked for decades. They were told no. Sometimes asking isn't enough. Sometimes people must demonstrate that they deserve respect by refusing to accept disrespect. Did people die? Fewer than you might think, the teacher said. Your ancestors were clever. They didn't fight a war, they performed surgery. They showed the Empire that the old ways weren't just wrong, they were unsustainable. And then they offered alternatives. The child considered this. Are we free now? You were born free, the teacher said. You've never known anything else. That's your ancestors' gift. They fought so you wouldn't have to. So you could grow up in a galaxy where species choose their own paths. Back at the assembly, Thane Corrigan prepared to address the gathering one final time. At 97 he was one of the last surviving architects of the rebellion. His voice was softer now, but it still carried. 50 years ago we were the Empire's servants, he began. We did the work they wouldn't do, fought the wars they wouldn't fight, died the deaths they wouldn't die. We were told this was natural. That some species serve and others rule. That this was the order of things. He paused, looking across faces from dozens of species. We proved them wrong. Not with violence, though we were prepared for it. Not with vengeance, though we had cause for it. We proved them wrong by preparing better than they imagined possible, by coordinating more effectively than they thought we could, and by offering alternatives they claimed couldn't work. Today the Empire and the Concordat sign a treaty as equals. Two philosophies, two approaches to civilization coexisting because both have proven viable. That's our legacy. Not the rebellion itself, but what the rebellion made possible. A galaxy where governance is earned through service rather than imposed through power. He gestured to the young delegates, humans, Cylinders, Kvalesh, Telmorians, species that once had been divided by hierarchy and now simply work together. The next generation won't remember the chains we wore. They'll be born into a galaxy where freedom is assumed, where different approaches to governance compete by serving rather than dominating, where the old certainties about masters and servants seem like primitive history. Thane smiled. That's exactly how it should be. We were the Empire's servants. We became its masters. And our greatest achievement is building a galaxy where neither servants nor masters are necessary, only citizens choosing their own paths, governing themselves by consent. The applause that followed mixed with chimes, stomps, harmonic resonances, and a dozen other species-specific expressions of approval. The old divisions hadn't disappeared, the Empire and Concordat still had different values, different priorities, different approaches. But they'd learned to coexist, to cooperate, to compete through service rather than domination. In the museum on Sanctum Station, the holographic Thane finished his historic speech from the first summit. The recording ended with words that had become the Concordat's unofficial motto. Power given can be power taken. But power earned, power shared, power chosen, that endures. The young human child listened carefully, then turned to her Cylinder teacher with a question that showed how much the galaxy had changed. Did we win? The teacher considered the question. Descendants of masters and servants, now simply teacher and student. We all won, the Cylinder said finally. Because we learned there were alternatives to the old ways. Because we proved that change was possible. Because we built something better together than either Empire or humanity could have built alone. Outside Unity Station, ships from 67 species moved through space. Some flew Imperial colors, some flew Concordat insignia, many flew both. They defended each other by choice, traded by mutual benefit, and cooperated because cooperation produced better outcomes than domination. The empire endured, transformed but alive. The concordat flourished, messy but free. And the galaxy moved forward, no longer certain that any one way was the only way, no longer dividing species into rulers and ruled. The servants who'd become masters had completed their greatest work, making both terms obsolete, replacing them with something better. Citizens. All of them. Choosing their own futures.